After hearing that introduction, she doesn't look this tired for nothing. I want to thank you for the wonderful topic. And I want to ask you please to help me remember that I should be reaching the back of the room when I am sharing with you, because I often drop my voice and I also talk very fast. So just raise your hand, all right? When Emma called me and discussed the meaning of this event for you, the chapter of Maths, I really believe, besides the calendar working for me, it's the topic that enticed me. And on your chair, you have much of what we're going to deal with this morning. And they were the two cards, the docile, I'll explain that in a minute, of Clare of Assisi, the Tavola of Francis of Assisi. We can thank Father Mel for those cards. He just brought them back from Assisi. I should have brought a much larger poster, but I tried to bring at least another visual. I think you'll be grateful, though, that you have something right in your hand as we share this morning. When I think about the living, I call it living the sense of the holy in the ordinary. There are two pivotal ways that I want to go about this morning. Last year, I took a course from Ken Himes at WTU. Maybe that name is familiar to some. Ken Himes. I took the course because everyone told me he's one of the finest teachers over there, and I could only take one course, and so I took Ken's course on moral theology at the time. He opened the very first day of class with a question to us, and it just wowed me. And it went something like this. Every one of us in this room know what it means to fall in love. And I sort of gulped. and there were all kinds of seminarians and students and all ages, men and women. And he said, because of the experience of knowing what it's like to fall in love, everything changes. You can get caught in traffic. You can have things that someone didn't follow through for one of your projects. You can some days not even feel all that well, or certainly don't have a lot of energy. And yet you respond to all the events that keep coming. Everything changes. Because in our whole being, we have changed. I want to open this sharing with that reflection. Everyone in this room knows what it means to have fallen in love. That is the holy in the ordinary. I was trying to prepare for this with just different readings, different things that we do. And I thought, I wonder if anybody in reflecting on spirituality today even uses that expression, to fall in love. I wonder if anyone talks about the consecrated life and dares to go back and use a phrase like falling in love. Well, of course, I started with my own rule, biased that I am, third order regular. And to me, Francis, and we'll talk about this the second part of this morning, Francis welcomed the penitents of Assisi, the townspeople, yourselves, myself, with the great commandment, the golden rule, if you will. They were his opening words to them, one of the very first documents that we have that was ever written down. And again, we'll take this later. But to love the Lord our God with our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole soul, and our neighbor as ourselves. And you know from Francis's writings, he can't use enough superlatives when he's all caught up in God. Fullness of all good. Our whole mind, our whole soul, our whole self. That's us, person, human being, sister, brother. It doesn't get better and it doesn't get different. That's us. That's as good as it's going to ever get. So that when people want to talk about coming to know the Lord, and again, that's every human being, to know some God, some one higher being. There will be many ways to do that. We, of course, have all these documents from all these conferences and all these international groups and what have you. So there was a time when a reflection was given in '94 that the measure of our faithfulness lies not in the possibilities of our own will, but in the abundance and the effectiveness of the love that God places in our hearts. Very often when we pray, my sense is we're always telling or asking or reminding God about something that He's already done. We pray in such a way, we pray, of course, our best way, the way we need as human beings. But this line right here, the love has already been placed in our hearts. When we got up this morning and put our 2 feet flat on the floor, that love was a given. The air that we're breathing, the very fact with the gift of life. And then other ways to talk about being in love with God. And I just do this as for our own reflection. It's an endlessness of our heart's quest. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you, St. Augustine. It's the absorbing center of our lives. Now, of course, when that center gets a little off kilter, that's when the difficulty comes. It's the search for God in the dailiness of our life, steeped in charism and to be intent only on God. The dominant, the organizing, the emotional center of our whole lives. To be on fire with God's transforming love. I like this one, to make my heart available to God. God is more than available to us. And to be obviously in love with God. Obviously in love with God. And that doesn't mean in each time in every season, even though Francis tells us that. I mean, we're human, right? We have our days. But in some ways, we're different. There was a time in our life when we fell in love. We know what that means. We really do. Everybody can nod their head. We absolutely know what that means. And that needs tending to all the time. And that's every day. Not just the peak times. Not just this week. Now the other part, the other piece of this that I want to share with you, if that's the case, that we truly understand what it means to be in love, then there is only one response in this whole experience of life, ordinary life, and it's going to be the response of gratitude. You are the fullness of all good. You are all good, the supreme good, the most high good. You are all good. And Francis will speak to God in the present. He will say, God gave us and gives us all of our life and our body and our mind. Gave us and gives us. He uses the scripture in the very same way. Francis reads the scriptures as our God, Jesus, teaching us, talking to him that morning, that day, that hour, that minute. In terms of gratitude, there's a beautiful reflection that I've kind of put together from a very long article that was done by a very revered friar, Father Joe Duino, who died in 1994. And Joe had an article in the Cord called Being Grateful, Being Franciscan. I'd like you just to hear just a couple sentences. Joe said, he's with God now, so he knows more about this than we can guess. Gratitude is at the very heart of the Franciscan charism. Francis almost shocks us with how thanksgiving pervades his everyday consciousness. Gratitude is not a virtue that he cultivates alongside the others. It's more like a climate that enfolds and penetrates every one of his waking moments. A climate, the air we breathe. Because they are so precious, special experiences of gratitude, whether given or received, have the power to dwell within us and to provide a constant source of hope and love. This is at the very heart of the Franciscan life. Franciscan gratitude provides the basis, God bless you, for an incredibly balanced life. So with these two hinges, if you will, having fallen in love, unmistakably so, even though we're not talking about walking 10 feet off the ground here. We're just talking about something that happened to our being. And then a desire. And you know how Francis loved the word desire. To live in gratitude. One of the mystics says, if the only prayer we ever say in our lifetime is thank you, it would suffice. And we know what Jesus thought about gratitude too. The story of the 10 lepers. With that in mind, I would like to invite you into the docile of Clare of Assisi first, because that's our oldest one. And you have that card in front of you. And I'm going to use this as an explanation, as a way into I'll move it up for the words later, but in the meantime you can be looking at your card. It's the very first, and this is the interesting thing with the docile. You don't paint a docile. You read one. You read it, or you write. We read it. The author wrote it. Okay, and I'll give the background. Do you all have your cards? Yes. You were sitting on them if you don't have them. Here are.
Yeah, the cards are different.
No wait. The cards are not different. No, cards are not different. I'm at the bottom. I'm at the bottom. All right. I'm at the bottom left. I'm going to go around this card. I'm going to take all 8 of the episodes. We have more cards if you're missing any. Somebody missing a card? Cards? Whoops. Yes. They need one over there.
There's a bunch of the there's my steps.
Oh, the back steps. Oh, well, hey, whoa, guess what?
You're supposed to have one of each, Claire and Francis.
Yes.
Thank you. And the little white chair.
Well, that was on the chair. I didn't put that there. Yes? I'm going to explain that. What's that?
A Claire.
You need a Claire. There you go. Here you go.
I have
Okay. How are we? Does everybody have? Are we all set?
The crisis of whatever chair came in the room.
Dominic, the trick was the back steps. What I did not do was put them on the back steps.
But they picked him up from a chair.
Yes, they did. This they did. Yes, they did. Well, yes, sir. Junior high teacher right here. Never get over that. Before we even go into the docile, though, because of your own life, your own desire to live gratitude and to be in love, to fall in love, to stay in love, to show that you're a person that knows about that, your own foundress called you to that. I believe her name is Armida Borelli. Did I say that right? Well, she told you, she said, but always you love. If you wanted to make a banner in all of your centers, her words to you were, but always you love. And Mel yesterday stole all my lines at the what can I tell you? Even Joan Chittister's book. We'll get to that later. But the one phrase again that your entire life, you say in your constitutions, I think it's Article 7, I didn't put that down, but you say your entire life as the members of the Institute is mission. And I was thinking this morning about Mel. Every time I'm around Mel, I hear about the kingdom. It's getting old, let me tell you. And I thought Mel does with the kingdom what I do with gratitude, so I guess it's got to be all right. So So your entire life is to be about mission. And you know, mission is who we are as person. It can't be any different than that. Joe Kenichi loves to make a point of saying Francis and Claire are dead, done. They've been there. We're here. We are the only ones who can fulfill in our lifetime whatever it is God's doing in our spirit. It's no mistake that our spirit resonates with the spirit of Francis and Claire, but it's our spirit. It's you take your name, you sit with your God. You're the one God zapped. You're the one God grasped. You're the one, not Francis, not Claire. This is 1997. I think that's real important. Mission. Mission is who you are as the person that you are in relationship as sister or brother with all of creation. The other line that I liked very much was what Paul VI said to you in 1972, and that is that it's deep in your hearts that the world is consecrated to God. Francis said the world is our cloister. Someone commented on, are we into crystals now? Not really. This is just a little paperweight, but it has the globe. Okay, it has the globe of the whole world on it, and I put it, of course, at the feet of the San Damiano crucifix. Deep in your hearts that the world is consecrated to God. You say that our lives are lived in moments, every daily event of every year, and that's the reason for your hope. I say that has an awful lot of common sense to it. Our lives are lived in moments of every daily event, the theme of today. And another time that the efforts you make are to graft the fruits of today. Not even last night, not even morning prayer. Right now, today, on the tree of the origins, and to do it in such a way as to have a living continuity. You say that. Well then, the only living continuity any of us can have is in ourselves. And the hope that we carry that there always will be new life. And then the other, and this just comes from reflections from the Vita Consecrata, which is a very fine document that has just come out to all of us. Today's expression, you want to have today's expression of Franciscan spirituality. We're going to look at an 800-year-old docile, but for no other reason than to do something that's going to touch our spirit today. This is not a history lesson. Sorry, Dominic. When I finished at the Franciscan Institute, I could have taught medieval history, let me tell you. And I've done a darn good job making sure I never did. But in the Vita Consecrata, it talks about, and again, well, of course, it's whoever translated it, but I love the phrase, an unbounded generosity and love. Unbounded. There is no stopping someone who's consumed by zeal for the gospel. So let's take a look at what a 13th century scribe, what was in the heart, the spirit, the talent, the hands, the prayer of a 13th century scribe, 1283, around the time the Saracens were thought to be very much a menace to the people of Assisi. This piece of wood, this big block of wood, if you've been in Santa Chiara's, you've seen it. This was painted. Someone with a great deal of fervor and talent took time to tell the story of Claire, and to do it in such a way that he would select, maybe a committee did, who knows, 8 episodes. 8 episodes that were going to tell the story of Claire. Now you're holding that in your hand right now, and I would like to, a docile is a painted theological reflection, actually. The theologians of this time were peasants, they were farmers, they were shopkeepers. It is an everyday person with talent trying to say to the world, here is Lady Claire. And we're privileged to actually possess this docile. The second one, which I'll take, but just so you know what you're holding, you can tell by the colors alone, we're not holding something in our hand that goes back 800 years. The conventual friars commissioned this about 5, 6, 7 years ago. A woman painted it, and it hangs in the Peace and Justice International Office in Assisi. It's magnificent. It's vibrant. It's magnificent. The value of this, though, is to say what happens in 1992, we'll say. I don't know the exact year. What happens in 1992 when Franciscans sit back and they reflect and they say to a very gifted woman, give us a tabula of Francis? Who decides the 8 episodes? After all the knowledge and studies and experience and 800 years of God blessing this charism. This is right at the heart of it happening. This is what, 30 years after Clare is still living. It's only 30 years. So, I'm going to go into the story of Clare, our sister, and I'm going to use the 2 hinges of falling in love and being grateful. And we're going to celebrate the ordinary. The painter starts at the lower left-hand corner, and that demonstrates the paradox of the Christian life. It's a very unusual place to start. It is like Philippians 2:6-11. God lowered himself. God did not deem equality with himself. It has to do with humility. It has to do with paradox. We're going to tell the story, this very unusual story, and we're going to begin at the lower left-hand corner. The first thing, and this is the most, probably one of the well-known stories, thanks to Celano at this time, will be Clare herself coming to grips with her. Now, her life to this point was that of a young penitent, okay, around the Cathedral of St. Rufinos. Later on, we know from the story, she gave to the poor. She spent hours of prayer and vigils and fasting. And along the way, she's been hearing Francis preach. Also, not only that, she's been listening to her very own cousin, who is a member of this ragtag army, if you will, down at the lower lawn, okay? Rufino has already gone. He's a follower. So all kinds, I'm saying this to you because notice in a way in our own life, that's not unusual. That we meet persons who strike us, we like to hear them preach, or we like to hear them face share with us. Something about them touches our spirit. And then it gets wider. You know, other people recommend this. Other people talk about, you might want to try this. You want to go here. You want to do this. You want to do that. This is happening in Clare's life for a couple years. We look at it as, certainly it's extraordinary, because Clare is an extraordinary woman. But her story of coming to know her God is not unlike all of our stories. It just simply is not. It has to do with the grace of baptism and the atmosphere of the town of Assisi and the unusual things that were going on account of dear old Francis, dear young Francis. So what you have now is Palm Sunday. On Palm Sunday, we know the story. Bishop Guido gives the palm to all of the parishioners. Clare does not move out of her seat fast enough, I guess. And he comes down to her, and he hands her the palm. Now, to an artist, to a medieval theologian, the palm could symbolize new birth, new life, certainly martyrdom. Clare, of course, the way they tell the story, Clare sees that. Clare feels that. This is going to be the sign. The palm. And in her heart, and having spoken with her maid and her sister and her friend, this was also the day. This is the day I'm leaving. And we all know that drama through the death's door and down to Porziuncula. Not a long walk, actually, okay? The deal is, remember, they've been down there for a couple years. On the one hand, Clare took a phenomenal risk. On the other hand, she had done a lot of homework. I mean, they had about 2 years of faithfulness to this very, very unique gospel call. As crazy as it was being demonstrated, they had 2 years of faithfulness to that. So she was really sure what God was calling her to. The very first choice, then, of the painter is to tell the story of Palm Sunday. The reflection that I chose, I did these, I wanted you to have the actual words of the 2 saints. And it's her reflection to the first letter to Agnes. You have truly merited to be called a sister, a spouse, and a mother of the Son of the Lord, of the Son of the Father of the Most High. I want you to hear that because the second part of this morning we're going to talk a little bit about those images. The very second one, right above this now, is this gets repeated quite often. This is a favorite of many, many artists. And it is Clare arriving with the friars. When you take a look at this, even her robes. Robes are very important on Dassel's tableau. Colors are very important. Blue and red, the whole sense of divinity, the whole closeness to royalty even. The eyes, the oval eyes, the almond-shaped kind of eyes, the intensity of the brothers directly looking into the eyes of Clare and certainly of Frances. Can you imagine? I mean, hope to God she hinted that she might do this before she shows up in Fort Ziankada, you know? I mean, they didn't have a chapter, right? 2 years. I don't think they got into this yet. There's a woman, for God's sakes. And we know, I mean, Frances had to take her to a monastery, to the Benedictine monastery. But in that, the beauty of this 800-year-old painting, notice the reverence, the sense of mystery that's going on here. And the risk. The wonderful risk that Frances took to do something different. But again, back into the ordinary thing. It was almost like, how could he not? Because God was in this scene. How could he not? Maybe he would rather have not. But God was allowing this to happen. She's all by herself in this scene in terms of the only one to come. She has the support of her family, of her friends and her sister, but she's going to be the only one who comes in this particular scene. What we have happening here is the actual investiture of Clare. And even in our time, ancient history now, we wore the, believe it or not, we wore the white bridal dress and all that stuff. And we had a lock of hair that was cut. The bishop cut, Cardinal Crowell cut ours, cut this lock of hair on investing day. A symbol of a total gift. A total gift. Also a symbol of something given up. This Dassel is also about entry into the Paschal mystery. There's a former conventual friar, I believe the person's name is Daniel Monger. He became a Camaldolese. I just spoke with him because I found out that he works with this for 2 weeks. He does programs or retreats or something with it. And his take on this is almost like the setting of a banquet table, where little by little every episode talks about greater desire to be Eucharist. To desire to be one with God in the self-giving that goes on. And he sees every episode as entering much more into the Paschal mystery. And then you do finally have the death of Francis on the last one. I think that's interesting. You could I just share that. I'd like to hear more from him. This form of life that we read at the bottom of this particular overhead transparency. I resolve and promise for myself and for my brothers always to have that same loving care and special solicitude for you as I have for them. I see Father Tom Hartle here, and I probably don't even know the stories of the other friars, but a very deep sense of mission to be in relationship with the Clares. And here is the beginning. Here's the seed of that. And Clare never let that go. She picks it up in her rule. She reminds them again in her testament, and we know the story about her. She actually went on a hunger strike because Francis was removing the friars in terms of being questors for the sisters, and actually it wasn't Francis, it was the bishop. So what Clare did was she went on a hunger strike. Thank you, and she got the friars back again to help the Clares. This particular scene. Again, the intensity of the eyes. Now, 800 years ago this was done. Clare now is robed. Her beautiful red royal garb is covered with the sign of humility, of dying to self again. Clare now is robed. Her beautiful red royal garb is covered with the sign of humility, of dying to self again. Claire, however, is all by herself on in this particular scene. If you let your eyes, you're holding the card, go right across the hands of Claire, who's pointing to her crozier now, to the other side of the dossal. Claire is in her community of her sisters, richly blessed by the gifts she gave of herself all those years before. And we're going to comment about that and the positioning of this on the dossal. There's no mistake about that. But what we want to remember here in terms of falling in love with God and being grateful, Claire hasn't got a clue about the other side of the dossal at this point of her life. She hasn't got a clue. And I think we tend to forget that. It's just like how we read the Gospels. We always know the Easter story. To go back onto this reflection, this meditation, and try to put ourselves in the place of this young woman who was simply in love with God and whatever it was going to take to fulfill that. As we continue to go up this dossal, this is going to be very unusual now. We're in the very recent years of the conversion, of the call, of her own story. And the artist is choosing on the left-hand side to just tell all those particular stories. This one is when her sister Agnes comes. Count Monaldo, who is the uncle. Of course, we know about forcing Agnes and her turning like dead weight and holding on to the altar, and they couldn't move her. And so you have Agnes holding on to the altar. Notice the number of followers at this point. You know, all tensed up, worried to death. But here's Claire staring. Look at the eyes again. Staring right into the eyes of her uncle. Now, in fairness to the uncle, maybe he wasn't the gentlest of souls. Her father was probably killed in some kind of a battle a couple years before. So he was more than likely the patriarch of the family. There are two ways to look at this. Number one, if another one goes off and follows this renegade Francis, they're losing all their land money, you know, because you want to marry these girls off to get the land and the liaisons and everything else that goes on politically. So fair enough. I mean, the man's worrying about the economy of his life, right? The other side is this is a pretty crazy event that's happening in Assisi. I mean, we've been putting up with Bernard and Rufino and Angelo and Leo, and I mean, they're a bunch of kooks. Now we got the women doing it, you know? So you have to admit, I mean, again, I'm trying to get into the ordinary, what it's like in the ordinary. Picture if your nieces or nephews decided to do this. I don't think we'd be real thrilled. So again, and what would a soldier, he would only know force. I mean, obviously she's not going to come of her own free will. We're going to have to lift her up and we're going to have to take her. And of course it gets ugly. Well, whatever was the story, whatever was this happening, like we'll say she's 14 years old, somewhere around the year 13. This is being painted now in 1283. That had to carve some kind of a memory on the artist. That had to carve some kind of a memory. Because here he is about to tell the story of the importance of Claire, and he doesn't give one episode, he gives two. He gives two. To Count Monaldo being a real brute and coming in and trying to take Agnes back. Again, we have Claire. This is one of these upper and lower pieces now. There are a couple of them on the dossal. So we have Agnes, obviously, finally being left alone. She's not going to be taken away. And then we have Agnes's investiture, the cutting of Agnes's hair. It's a very tender scene. If you notice, look at the hands of Claire holding the hands of Agnes. And again, eye to eye, the sense of a mystery going on here. I mean, wouldn't you be thrilled if your sister came? Hey, her mother's going to come later, right? But it is not even that. It's this incredible kinship of the spirit. That's what's happening in this younger sister is the same thing that happened in her heart. And she's willing to risk this to come. Francis, again, you know, here's even more. I mean, he's devastating this family. He has Rufino, he has Agnes, he has Claire, he's going to get Ortolano. I mean, he's got to be a little worried. But the point here is he goes through with it. He goes through with it. He invests Agnes. And so the artist decides that needs to be on the dossal. Also, she's been a faithful member all these years. He knows the end of the story too. Agnes has been a faithful member of this brand new community. We're on the other side now. We're moving right on down, and this is extremely important. This particular one, this is pivotal to the whole dossal. First of all, I'm going to start with the quote at the bottom. One of the most loved reflections on Clare is her very human, very practical manner of being a leader. She refused to be called an abbess until the Pope made her take the title for the sake of the whole group, so she had to back down. So that when she got a chance to describe the role description, if you will, of an abbess, she just paid a whole lot of attention to the way Francis was forming his friars. And she tells the sisters that an abbess should act in such a way that your sisters will obey you more out of love than they certainly would out of fear. Now that's a rather prophetic, radical change. Not that the Benedictine abbesses were being obeyed out of fear, but everything was so hierarchical, and Clare knew that well. Remember, she spent some time in those abbeys, in the monastery. She knew that, and she just knew what she didn't want. And that's the ordinary grace of our life too. We know, even though we probably don't stand still long enough to catch it, we do know what we don't want. We do know how we're acting, that we don't like how we're acting, or we know that, okay? We do know the direction or the choice that we want to try to keep making faithfully. So what you have here is a very clear sense of Clare's understanding by now what God is doing. It's also why she wouldn't let anybody else tell her what rule to follow. She wouldn't find those words in any other rule. Francis tells the friars that you are the minister is to behave toward the friars as though the minister is the employee. Now, that's probably a bad translation, okay? But we get the idea. And we are the employers. Clare does the same thing. She uses the word servants. This particular frame cuts through the gut, if you will. That's the way they talk about it anyway in describing it. It cuts through the gut of Clare, or the womb of Clare. Therefore, the artist is going to show what is most important in the vocation project, the mission project of Clare of Assisi. What was most important in her mission project was that in coming to serve God, God gave her sisters. And it is in the ordinary taking care of one another that the gospel is most radically lived. It is in the ordinary love that we show one another that we give any kind of valid witness to our, what we would call our prayer life, our life of contemplation. This is one of the most important episodes on the whole 800-year-old dossal. Clare is multiplying the loaves in this picture. Remember, she's now surrounded by her own sisters. They have come to her very anxious because there was not enough bread, and she tells them not to worry. Even the divine intervention, I'm sure it's a legend by now. 30 years later, it's a legend, but it's such a legend that they make sure he paints it onto the dossal. And even the ordinariness, they come to the abbess, we don't have bread. We could say, look, you don't know how to work the ovens? But it was an invitation, a sign, if you will, a divine intervention, whatever we want to call special events. Probably never happened. But it's a story that tells us how much Clare was cared for her sisters. We know the story about her getting up during the night and putting blankets on the sisters and caring for the sick ones and all that. Well, right through the womb of Clare, right through the gut, if you will. And her hand is even pointing toward that particular episode. It's also pointing toward the crozier. The crozier is a symbol of an abbess. At this time, it's put in her hand because of her presence, which, as they say, saved the city from the Saracens. So she's regal. She's regal. She's not just an abbess. She's almost like she's their lady. So he puts this wonderful crozier in her hand when he decides to paint her. But what it points to right now is evangelical life. We might mention that later this morning. It's a real important term for us as Franciscans right now. Well, there you have it, right on the painting of Clare. I also like to comment here. In the background of all of these episodes, this is real key, you have all these buildings. In the background of, I think it's almost every single episode, but maybe one, you have the city. You have the city, the marketplace. The author is making a statement that Clare never left the marketplace, even though she was in the cloister. That anything to do with the way she lived her daily life, and that's all she could live was her daily life, in the dailiness of it all, influenced the marketplace, influenced the city and everything else besides. Buildings are in almost every one of these episodes. Interestingly enough, we're going to jump now to something like, I think the Loaves actually might have been a 26-year jump. So they went from Agnes at age 14 finally escaping her uncle and joining the sisters. And 26 years later, don't tell me why, we get the multiplication of the loaves. Now we're going to jump another 15 years. And this is a very typical medieval presentation of the deathbed of a holy one. Our Lady is present. Mary has come with the angels. The evangelical life mode here is that the faces of the angels are the same faces of Clare's sisters in the one before. So that if you will be kind and you will meet one another in the dailiness of life, the ones right at your elbow, you will be meeting angels. You will be meeting the people who will come with Mary when it's time for you to come home. Angels unawares, don't they talk about that? And isn't that rough? But it's purposefully painted in there. And the people who saw it they obviously wouldn't mistake that. The faces are the same of the sisters, only now they're standing with Our Lady as angels, almost as angels. This is one of those two-part things. Mary is twice, but then here we have her coming with the burial cloth. But the burial cloth looks almost like an altar cloth, a Eucharist moment. The burial cloth, when you really see it closer, is fringed, and it's like a tablecloth, a Eucharist. Okay, this also, the episode before was certainly seen as Eucharist, the multiplication of the loaves. So Mary's coming now to prepare. Clare's wide awake. Clare has not died. Mary is visiting her, welcoming her, preparing her, getting her ready, and Clare is able to still sense the unity, if you will, the unity with her sisters in this greatest of all moments of her life. The very last scene on the Dossal, and I chose the blessing that Clare gives us with this, will be the death of Clare, and of course presided over by the Pope. Now, we know how it took to her deathbed for Clare to get permission to finally have her rule. What we have here is the Pope is proclaiming the life of Clare as a model for all Christians. The Pope is present, but he is present with a mission. He's certainly blessing Clare, and we know he finally approved the rule. But he has come with notice some of the friars, but then all the other church people, all the bishops and all. The sense of the ecclesial moment that was the death of Clare. The sense of what this one person meant for the sake of the entire church. It's almost not unlike the Bishop Guido wrapping his cape around Francis when he stripped before his father. He was embraced by the church at that moment, symbolically. That's what this is. The ecclesial moment that becomes the death of Clare for all of us because of her faithfulness to the gospel, because of her faithfulness to something very unique, very different, unusual, but also extremely simple, ordinary. When you come down to it, she lived all those years inside a monastery with a bunch of sisters. Faithfully, gratefully, because she had fallen in love with God. Would you have any questions or comments before I would? Yes.
What was the length between before she died and the other?
15 years. In terms of the multiplication of the lobes, then 15 years later.
7 and 8 also.
15 years. Oh no, 7 and 8, that's the death scene. Again, that's a good question, because the artist, for some reason, all the choices that you could have, he gives the 2 episodes of the moment that Claire's dying. He gives 2 to Agnes, and he gives 2 to her death. Yes.
Would you put number 5 up again?
What's the in-between figure?
Wait a minute now. What's the what? I might have. I have them in both places. Am I going to trip? Am I going to kill myself? Am I going to kill myself? There you go.
There's 2 Agneses in a sense. One
Here you go.
below, one above.
There you go.
That one.
This is still the uncle trying his best to grab her. See the anger there? You can see the way he's got it. He's got his hand on her arm. So it's like a soldier, or it's one of his soldiers, if it's not the uncle. Really still trying to grab her, and that's when she becomes like a dead weight.
So there's 2 scenes in there. One of both.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, there are 2. Sometimes they have the 2 scenes. What happens is the final, one of the writers says, your Joe Woods has done some of this. One of the writers says that when you prepare to serve the Lord, be prepared for tribulation and trial. So it's like this, almost a reflection about the kind of suffering that's going to happen when you stay with the purpose that you believe is God's will for you. Don't expect anything different. There will be suffering. That's a comment that's been made in studying this. And then finally the investing.
Is there any meaning to the 2 figures on the lower right?
Here?
Yes.
Just members of the community. Or rather the people, no, wrong. No, because they're not dressed as nuns. Mike, I don't know the answer to that. I could guess by saying that even when Claire came to be invested, she came with her neighbors and her sisters, her family. She came with other ladies in waiting. My guess is probably Agnes had some other ladies in waiting, because these are not Claire's. I don't know.
So there is presumably not any time difference between 4 and 5?
No, that's what we said. They are the same. The author chose, the writer, the artist chose this to take 2 episodes of Agnes, and it could well be in his mind how extraordinary. Like this was a terrible scene. This woman could have been brutalized, and so for one, that's what stayed with him. She's only 14 years old, so he gives 2 episodes to it. We didn't. When you think of it, we didn't need to see Francis cutting hair for 2 of them, but he did. But it's that, it was so extraordinary, the beginning of the Claires, of the poor ladies. That was so extraordinary. And by now, they've been faithful. By now, they have a beautiful reputation in the city of Assisi. So I would think that in reflecting back, that's why the choice would be to tell the story from the beginning.
Are they trying to lift her? Is that what they're trying to do?
They're trying. They would have taken her. It was like a miracle kind of thing, a divine intervention. She became like dead weight, and they couldn't move her. Otherwise, they would. A 14-year-old, she wouldn't have had a chance.
I was
Dominic?
going to say, in a way, as a townsperson, it's kind of bringing to the memory of the town that we revere these women now, but in the beginning we were opposed to it.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh
In a
yeah.
sense.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like bringing to the memory of the community that we like the now, but
Oh yeah.
they had their problems, and our big shots were the opponents of it.
Well, that's right.
I mean,
That's
it's kind
yeah.
of an
Yeah.
addition in one way of kind of the opposition that we
If we only had the eyes to see type
That's
thing.
right.
Yeah, and by now they've been faithful, so that they've proven it.
Calvin,
Tom?
can you say a little bit more about the Eucharist? I'm very intrigued by that notion of this as a Eucharistic celebration of life?
Well, all I can say right now, this one Camaldolese friar now, he actually compared it to Babette's feast in terms of the extravagance of spilling yourself out, to the generosity, if you will, the extravagance of spilling yourself out, emptying yourself, being part of the Paschal mystery, which is Eucharist. And so that each episode builds into that. And then even the fact of Our Lady coming with what really looks as much like an altar cloth as it does like a burial shroud. So that the table of the Lord, the banquet of the Lord has been set by the faithfulness of Clare to the mystery that began in her on Palm Sunday. And see, when you do Palm Sunday ends with Easter Sunday. But you got to get through Good Friday and Holy Thursday. So my thing is, I think we've only just begun theological reflection on the Docile. If we just get a couple of themes and then really go into it. Yes? Okay, thank you for the question very much. Where is the legend of the Saracen in that? Are you finished as far as other comments? I wanted to ask you, what's not there? What's not on this Docile? I mean, here's an artist that decides to do 2 episodes of 14-year-old Agnes and 2 episodes of the death of Clare. What's not on the Docile? Which could be part legend, but there's certainly some truth to it. I mean, there's certainly something that she did that saved the city. Okay, that's not there. There's no unless you want to say the crozier. Yes.
Could you show us also the last where she's dying? Because back to Tom's question, from what I can see in the pictures, the robe which dropped upon her was very royal in colors.
Yes.
Like maybe the royal banquet.
Yes, it's a tapestry.
I mean, that's a tapestry.
It's a tapestry. Yeah, or it's a very ornate altar cloth.
Yes.
It's magnificent is what it is. What you have to remember as far as our colors and all go with this is because it's 800 years old, we can't get that vibrancy. You know, yeah, that's a tapestry. That's royal. And in some ways, if you tried to look at the one that Mary was bringing her, the one before this, it's like up close. Now we get up close. But look at the red border. I mean, this is, who knows? It's certainly not a theologian. It's an artist painting. But it is unbelievably rich in the understanding of who this woman was. Yes?
Well, you were talking about the scene of the multiplication of the loaves. It's a direct correlation between Mary's influence with Jesus and Cana.
Yes.
And as Clare was called the footprint of Our Lady, you have Clare now being asked to intercede by one of her sisters and her power of prayer. So it's sort of a juxtaposition of her influence with the Lord through prayer, also similar to Our Lady.
Yes, that's beautiful. Thank you. See, you can't imagine where this can go. Yes.
Well, one thing that strikes me is that, with Francis, we see him as the mirror of Christ, and Clare as the mirror of Mary. And that she comes down as Christ gave Francis the 5 wounds, Mary comes to attend Clare, and prepare her for,
So that's, yes, yeah. And when you said the mirror, I just want to point out something because I'll forget it. This is, I forget who might have, Bill Short. Bill Short did this. Clare's writings are filled with the image of the mirror, all right? There were no mirrors in the cloister, obviously. Well, no mirrors in the cloister when I entered either. But that's why, there's the fire hydrant thing, so boy, you could fix your veil great. There's fire, you really could, the fire hydrant. And you could also get a lot of trouble being caught doing it. Anyway, this crucifix, I don't, if I move this, I'm not going to move it. That crucifix hung in San Damiano for 40, 50 years before they had to move up to Assisi. That crucifix, first of all, is tilted. The halo is tilted, and it is gold. That halo is gold. Clare says, look into the mirror and see there yourself. You see the Christ. Look into the mirror. The only mirror that Claire could ever have looked into was when she knelt before the crucifix and the gold halo reflected her image back. Isn't that wonderful? That is the mirror that she's talking. Look into the face of Christ. Gaze upon the Lord. She says that. Gaze upon the Lord. She did it. So did her sisters, time and time and time again. If they had one possession that they carried with them up into the city walls, it was the crucifix. So I just say that, let it mirror. Now, I think you may need to take a stand-up, right? And it's 10 minutes to 11, so could we say 11? 11? Thank you. I had a wonderful intervention at the break just now, and it won't leave me. One of your members is an artist. If you don't mind standing. I should know more about that, I think, right? And I think you've named it, and I can't wait to go home and talk to some other people. What is your name? Lucy. Lucy? Lucy says that they have a saying with artists that the anonymous is a woman. When you have anybody who was anonymous, most likely it was a woman. But you know, when you take a look at what we just traveled through in the Tavola, we're going to call this a Tavola instead of a docile. That seems to be getting complicated. D-O-S-S-A-L is the spelling of docile. We can't figure out the derivative. Tavola is easy enough. It's a tablet that's written on and carried in procession and carried at moments of special graces. So let's keep calling this thing a Tavola, T-A-V-O-L-A. Anyway, if you look at the emphasis that was placed on, say, Agnes, all right, and the cutting of the hair and the visitation of the Virgin Mary, that well could be a woman's perspective on Claire. And not even showing the whole thing about the Saracens coming in and you know, Claire holding the monsters, like sort of not putting that on, but definitely putting on the multiplication of the loaves. We need to, we'll have to do some homework on that. Thank you. Thank you. Now, let's get into Francis just a little bit. Here we are 800 years later, and it's going to come time for the conventuals, wise persons that they are,
We're humble, too.
Yeah. Goes with the territory. By the way, as he says, humble, I'm a member of the community that has had the sisters of Father Stephen Hartigan. Yes, I knew that. Yeah. I waited all morning for that. My claim to fame in this room is that we had the Hartigan sisters. Sister Vincentine taught me history when I was a postulant. Anyway, when we take a look at this next one, we've got 800 years. You know, we have Father Ignatius Brady, who taught us the writings of Francis, who got us into the truths of why Francis said this and not that, and what the words meant, who spent his whole life working, among other things, with the primary text, so that we could now, in 1982, have the book. Thank you. That's not a long time. Don't sit here in any way feeling left out, like, oh, I wish we knew all that. None of us knew all this. None of us knew Claire till 1993 when it became her year, and Margaret Carney wrote the book, you know. And yet there was, not to say there weren't things around, but we didn't have the primary text translated in English. We have them. We didn't have all that work done with the manuscripts. We have them. We live in a marvelous, marvelous age of being Franciscan. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. 800 years in this marvelous age. Another woman gets invited to write a Tavola. And what I got to talk to Joe Woods or somebody over in Rome and say, what did you tell her? How did you pick this and not that when it came time to come up with 8 episodes in the life of Francis? So let's take a look. The very first one is the one where Francis most experiences within himself the poverty. This is Francis's first realization of an action of God totally beyond anything that he was humanly capable of. The quote we know from the Testament is that which was bitter to him turned into sweetness. That is one of the thesis sentences, if you will, key things for discernment of the Spirit of God.